Welcome to the lecture on environmental impact of the energy industry. We are going to look at how particular energy sectors affect the environment. And in this lecture, we will look at how thermal power industry affects the environment. After this lecture, you will be able to classify sources of negative impact of energy industry, list possible environmental impacts of the thermal power industry, and describe consequences of the negative impact. The energy produced by the power plants doesn't pollute the environment itself, but the waste products of its generation could be dangerous to nature. Sources of negative impact on nature can be classified by the type of impact. Sources affecting air quality, for example, emissions of nitrogen and sulfur oxides, carbon monoxides, volatile hydrocarbons, dust, and a number of other pollutants. Sources changing radiation and heat balance of the atmosphere, for example, greenhouse gas emissions, carbon dioxide, methane, and others. Sources disturbing the natural thermal conditions, for example, heat emissions. Sources that cause ecosystem disturbance and destruction, water pollution, soil contamination, and noise emissions. Thermal power plants and boiler houses are now an important element of the modern city infrastructure. They provide heat and hot water to residential and social buildings, support production and industrial enterprises. The main energy source in the world is fossil fuel, coal, oil, and gas. To convert it into energy, it must be burned. All processes related to energy conversion, in particular production, transportation, processing, and combustion of fossil fuels, are powerful sources of anthropogenic impact on the environment. Let's start with coal fuel. Coal industry has many environmental problems. These include air and water pollution, land use problems, and waste management issues. First of all, coal is the largest source of anthropogenic increase of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Coal and oxygen reaction occur during combustion. As a result, carbon, sulfur, and nitrogen oxides are formed. As discussed in the previous lecture, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. Sulfur and nitrogen oxides react in the atmosphere to form small particles that are dangerous to human health. In 2008, the World Health Organization and other organizations estimated that coal particle pollution caused approximately 1 million deaths worldwide each year, representing approximately one-third of all premature deaths associated with all sources of air pollution. Coal combustion also produces waste in the form of ash, which is released to the atmosphere. These include many substances that are hazardous then released into the environment. You can see a list of these components on the slide. Although the concentration of these substances are small, then large amounts of coal are burned, the amount of these substances can reach dangerous level for human health. For example, mercury is concentrated up the food chain as it is converted into methylmercury, a toxic compound that harms both wildlife and humans. In addition, coal waste may contain radioactive substances. Then, this hazardous waste has to be stored somewhere. Water storage as ash ponds or dry storage as landfills are used to store ash. This poses great risk as the pollutants and heavy metals contained in the waste can enter groundwater and pollute it for decades or centuries. As a result of coal mine development, soil is damaged, wildlife is displaced or destroyed, the aesthetic appearance of the landscape is changed, and the amount of dust around the mining site is increased, which significantly affects air quality. The picture on the slide shows how the terrain changes. After mining, it is difficult or almost impossible to restore the soil, wildlife and ecosystem of the area. Underground mining has the risk of possible mine accidents, which pose a danger to people both underground and on the surface. Oil is a mixture of very toxic elements. These elements affect both human health and ecosystems. Many compounds contained in oil can cause cancer and other diseases. Immunity weakens, making people more sensitive to disease. Negative impacts occur throughout the production cycle, from oil extraction, gas flaring for example, to refining and consumption. The Earth's carbon cycle is disrupted when oil is burned. Carbon, which accumulates under the ground for millions of years, is lifted to the surface and burned. A large amount of carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere then it is burned. In addition, the combustion of oil produces nitrogen and sulfur oxides and black carbon. Fine particulates cause heart problems or death. Oxides react with water to form acid rain. Acid rains affect ecosystems and can harm trees, fish and coral reefs. Oil spills can be caused by emergency situations at wells, tankers, offshore platforms and during transportation of oil. You can see the consequences of such incidents in the picture on the slide. The largest oil spill at sea in the history of industry occurred in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010, which is called the Deep Sea Horizon. This disaster caused huge damage to the environment. Natural gas is a cleaner and more environmentally friendly fuel compared to other fossil fuels. It is true that combustion of natural gas produces less carbon dioxide than combustion of coal or gas. But in absolute terms, natural gas accounts for almost a quarter of all human carbon emissions. As the demand for natural gas increases, this contribution will only increase. In addition, methane itself, the main component of natural gas, is a greenhouse gas, then it enters the atmosphere. Methane may be released into the atmosphere throughout leaks during fuel extraction, storage and transportation. Methane stays in the atmosphere for a shorter time than carbon dioxide, but traps heat more intensely, which increases the greenhouse effect. In calculation, for 100 years, the greenhouse activity of methane is 28 times higher than that of carbon dioxide. Combustion products of methane are only water and carbon dioxide. As a result, natural gas emits no sulfur substances or mercury. Nitrogen oxides are emitted several times less per unit of energy compared to oil or coal. In addition, there is no formation of ash and soot. All thermal cycles use water as a coolant to start thermodynamic cycles. As a result, thermal contamination of water bodies occurs. If the pond is natural and not artificial, ecosystems are disturbed. Poorly treated water from industrial sewers, ash dams, gets into the ponds and causes great harm to the environment. All hazardous substances contained in the fuel combustion waste get into water and pollute it. So, in this lecture you have learned about classification of negative impact of sources of the energy industry, environmental impacts of the thermal power industry and fossil fuels, and consequences of the negative impact.